We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Hayam and Beis in Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 45b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing, let's say you have a situation where a woman commits adultery when she's a Nara, and then she's being tried, she's already a Bogeres. So the question is, had she committed the adultery as a Bogeres, she would have gotten Chenek. So now that she's being tried as a Bogeres, should she get Chenek? And the Gemara now is suggesting that maybe that's a Machlokas Tanoim. It's a Machlokas Tanoim by a case that seems unrelated, but the case is as follows. Let's say you have a situation of a person who commits a sin when he's a regular person, but then he becomes appointed either as a Nasi, or he becomes appointed as a Kohen Gadol, and then he finds out about the sin. So in that case now, he's sort of changed into a new status at the time of the idea of the Chet. And so that also seems to be a Machlokas. According to the Tanakama brought in the previous Amud, so we say that the person brings the carbon of a Hedyot because the sin was committed as a Hedyot. But Rabbi Shimon says no, he's entirely Pater, because at the time of the idea, he's already changed, he's already become a Nasi or a Kohen Gadol. And so the Gemara wants to say it's exactly the same Machlokas Tanoim would apply by a Bogeres in terms of the case of the adultery. But the Gemara says you can't compare the two. What Rabbi Shimon is saying, we can say that Rabbi Shimon is saying that we follow also the time of when he finds out about the sin. But the azil basar yediyah v'lo azil basar chata mishamatli. But do you see in Rabbi Shimon that he only follows the time of finding out about the sin of the yediyah and not of the time of the actual sin? If that was the case, if Rabbi Shimon was saying we really follow the time when he found out about the sin only the time of the yediyah. So imkain laisi carbon kihasht. If that was the case, Rabbi Shimon shouldn't have said that this nasi or this kohen gadol is totally pater from a carbon. He should have said bring the carbon as you are now, according to the status you are now, meaning mashuach par v'nasi soyer, meaning a mashuach, meaning a kohen gadol should bring a par and a nasi should bring a soyer. But that's not what Rabbi Shimon is saying. Rabbi Shimon is simply saying that the person is totally pater because you have different karbanos obligations according to the different time periods. The time of the sin there was one carbon, and the time of the idea obligates a different carbon. You don't have both at one carbon, and therefore you're completely pater, but it's really unrelated to our case. Rashi over here explains, There's no one here that's really saying that the carbon changes because the body changes. Because Rabbi Shimon is not saying that they bring a carbon according to their status right now. He's just saying they're completely pater. His reason is simple, because we require the yediyah and the chet to be in one body at one time period. Diazal af basar yediyah, meaning he's also following yediyah. Kolomar shas hachet mechayavto kispa, v'shas yediyah mechayavto soyer. He's saying that the time of the sin makes him bring a kispa, and the time of the yediyah of the sin makes him bring a soyer. Lafikach ein kan echad mikol hakarbana shechayavto Torah. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon argues you don't have any real full carbon to bring, and there's no carbon, and therefore he's completely pater. So therefore, the Gemara is saying really the two cases are not comparable. And so the Gemara answers, Ha'amar le Rabbi Yochanan latana. Rather, the answer is that Rabbi Yochanan did say to the Tana, Tani, you should teach it really as follows, Tidon b'skila. That really, no, she really does get skila. In this case where she's being tried as a Bogeres, but since she committed the sin as a Nara, and the punishment as a Nara for this adultery is skila, therefore, really she does get skila. It should not be, as we said earlier, that she gets chenek. And the Gemara says, V'amai, but why is that the case? Nara hamorasa amar achmana v'habogeres. He doesn't the Torah say Nara hamorasa, and this girl is a Bogeres? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Law says, Amar Kra, because the Pasuk says, Hanara shohaisa kvar. Since it says Hanara, as Rashi over here says, Hanara v'hotziu es Hanara. V'lo kasav v'hotziu. It doesn't have to say v'hotziu es Hanara. It should just say they bring her out. Why does it say they bring out the Nara? So since it says Hanara, therefore it comes to include this situation over here, Hanara shohaisa kvar. It means to say she was earlier a Nara, even though she's not a Nara right now, even though she's a Bogeres right now, still if she committed the sin as a Nara, the punishment is going to be skila. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Chananya, Rabbi Law. Rabbi Chananya said to Rabbi Law, if so, if that's the case, Milka nami lilki, umeya sela nami l'shalim. If that's the case, so then he should get malchus. Let's say it turns out he's lying in this situation. He should get malchus. He should pay the 100 sela as a fine, but he doesn't. If we go by the time that the sin actually occurred, then we should say that that's true for him as well, on his side as well. And the Gemara says, Amar le, so he said back to him, Rachmana nitzlan mehai daita. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should save us from that kind of thinking. That kind of thinking is incorrect. Of course that's not true. We shouldn't compare her to him. And the Gemara continues, Adarab, what do you mean? On the contrary, Rachman and Nitzlan Midaita Didach, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu should save us from your thinking. Of course we should compare the two. But the Gemara now clarifies and says, V'tayim amai, but what is the reason? Why do we make a distinction? Why do we say that the girl, when she becomes a bogeres, she still gets treated at the time of the sin when she was a nara, she gets skila. But in terms of him, if it turns out he's lying, he's going to get away with not having the malchus and not having the meyasela because she's a bogeres. And the Gemara answers very simply, and this was alluded to Rashi by Rashi on the previous Amud. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avin. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avin says, V'itema Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba. Some people say it's Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba that says, Zu ma'aseha garmula. In the case where she actually committed the adultery, it is the committing of the adultery, the deed, that causes the punishment. And at that time when the deed was committed, she was a nara, and therefore she gets skila. V'zeh, but this guy over here who's lying, she really didn't commit the adultery. So akim asfasav garmulo, it's the twisting of his lips that's causing the sin. In other words, when he verbalized, when he accused her, that's what he did wrong, and therefore we go by the time of the accusation. Zu ma'aseh garmulo kashi zanoi, nara zanoi. When it comes to the woman, so it's her deeds that cause the sin and cause the punishment. And when did she commit the adultery? It's when she was a nara, so she's treated as a nara. V'zeh akim asfasav garmulo. But again, when it comes to the man, it's the fact that he lied, the fact that he accused her, that causes him to be punished. But emas kamechayev hayishaita. At what moment is he becoming chayev? It's at the moment that he's making the accusation. Vayishaita bogeres havoyin. At the time of the accusation, she's a bogeres, and therefore the halacha again of the malchus and the meyasela does not apply to a bogeres. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, this is a Tosefta, Nara HaMoras, if you have a young girl who's betrothed, Shazinsin, she commits adultery, Soklin Osal Pesach Beisavish, so she gets skila at the entrance of the house of her father. Ein lo Pesach Beisa Av, if she doesn't have an entrance of the house of her father. Soklin Osal Pesach Shar Ho'irahi, so then they give her skila at the entrance of the gate of that city. Uve'ir sharuba ovdei kochavim. Now, if it's a city which the majority of the people of the city are idol worshippers, so soklin osal pesach bezdin. So then the skila happens at the entrance of the bezdin. Kayotze b'davar ata omer. Similarly, we say as follows: Ha'oved avodas kochavim. Let's say a person worships idols. Soklin osal al shar sho'avad bo. So then he gets skila at the gate which he worshipped by. Uve'ir sharuba ovdei kochavim. However, let's say it's a city where the majority of the people are ovdei kochavim. So then again, we don't do it at the gate of the city where he did the avodah zarah. Rather, soklin oso al pesach bezdin. Rather, we give the skila at the entrance of the bezdin. And the Gemara continues: Menahani mili. What is the source for these halachas? The Tanu Rabbanan, because our rabbis taught she'arecha. It says you're going to do this, talking about the situation of the person who serves avodah zarah. He's going to be taken to your gate. Zeshar she'avad bo refers to the fact that he's killed by the gate of the city where he worshipped the avodah zarah. Ata omer shar she'avad bo. You're saying that it's the gate where he worshipped. Oeino ela shar she'nidon bo. Maybe it's the gate of the city where he was judged for the worshipping of the avodah zarah. And to that, the Gemara says, Nemar sharecha lamato. It says sharecha lamato. V'nemar sharecha lamala. Earlier in the pasuk, it also talks about sharecha, and there it's clear what it means. Ma sharecha amar lamala shar sha'avad bo. Just like the sharecha that stated earlier, it's talking about the gate where he's actually doing the worshipping of the avodah zarah. Av sharecha amar lamata shar sha'avad bo. So too that sharecha that it says below, it's also talking about the gate that he worships at. Davar acher, another explanation, she'arecha, it has to be your gate, meaning to say it has to be a Jewish city, v'lo sharei ovdei kochavim. It can't be the gate of the city of ovdei kochavim. And the Gemara says, well, how could you use it for both? Hai sharecha, ha fikta. You already used sharecha for something. Now you're going to use it for this idea as well, that it can't be sharei ovdei kochavim. And to that, the Gemara says, no, imkain, if so, lema cross shar. The pasuk could have just said shar. It didn't need to say she'arecha. My she'arecha, why does it say she'arecha, your gates? Shema mina tarti. You see both of these ideas. Again, you see the idea that it has to be the shar she'avad bo, and you also see that it's she'arecha v'lo sharei ovdei kochavim. And the Gemara continues, eshkechan avodas kochavim. So we find the source for this idea by sharecha, by avodas kochavim. Nara hamorasim and all. And where is the source for this halacha that we just said earlier? Also by Nara hamorasa, that you also bring her by the gate of the city. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Avo says, Gomar Pesach mi Pesach u Pesach mi Shar v'Shar mi Sharecha. We learn Pesach from Pesach and Pesach from Shar and Shar from Sha'arecha. And Rashi over here explains, Gomar Pesach mi Pesach u Pesach mishar, asmachta de Rabbanan bialma. This is really just an asmachta of the Rabbanan to have this kind of limud. And what the limud means is as follows. Ksiv hacha el Pesach beis avia. It says over here, when it talks about the girl, you bring her to the Pesach beis avia, to the doorway of the house of her father. Uchsiv b'mishkan, and it says by the Mishkan, Masach Pesach shar echotzer. It talks about the word Pesach, and it talks about shar. Ma Pesach amr b'mishkan shar imo, just like the word Pesach by the Mishkan also includes a gate. Av Pesach amr kan shar imo, so too the Pesach that it mentions over here by the Nara Hamorasa also includes the word, it's as if it includes the word shar, it's as if it includes the word gate. V'hadar gamar hai shar misharecha, now we'll take that shar that we just transferred to Nara Hamorasa, and we'll understand that shar the same way we understood the sharecha ha'amr ba'avodas kochavim, which is said by avodas kochavim. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Motzi Shem Ra, let's say you have a case of Motzi Shem Ra. Again, the husband here is lying. He's saying that she had committed adultery. Really, she did not. Loka v'nosein meyosela. The Tanakama says that he's going to get malchus, and he's going to pay the meyosela, he's going to pay the fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lilkos loka mikol makom. In terms of malchus, you get that in any scenario, whether there was an act of relations or not. But meyosela baal nosein lo baal no nosein. When it comes to the 100 sela, if he had relations, he pays it. If he did not have relations, he does not have to pay it. And Rashi over here explains within Rabbi Yehuda's position, Lilkos malchus b'motzi Shem Ra mivi Yisro. So when it comes to malchus, it says by Motzi Shem Ra he gets malchus. That's the pasuk of Yisro. So loka mikol makam, there he gets malchus in any situation. Bein boal u'bal bezdin v'hotzi Shem Ra al yedei be'ilos. So whether he had relations and he comes to bezdin and he says that when he had relations, it turns out v'yamar, he says lo motzasi levitcha besulam, I didn't find that your daughter was a besula, was a virgin. Bein lo baal, or whether let's say he didn't have relations with her, Ubala Bezin v'yamar, and he just comes to Bezin and says, Bo'uli Edim, there are Edim that came to me and told me, Shezinsa b'veisavia, that she committed adultery in the house of her father, V'harehi lefnechem, and here she is in front of you. It doesn't make any difference. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. When it comes to malchus, in all scenarios, he's going to get malchus if it turns out that he is lying. But when it comes to the meyasela, so there we make a distinction. If he had relations with her and he says that he found that she wasn't a basula, then he has to pay the meyasela. Otherwise, he does not pay the meyasela. And the Gemara says, "Kamiflagi beplugsa de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov v'Rabbanan." This machlokus of the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda is really the same machlokus as between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan. V'hachi kamar, and here's how you understand it: Hamotzi Shem Ra, if he's Motzi Shem Ra, loka v'nosein meya sela, he gets malchus and he pays the 100 sela. Bein boal, bein shalo boal, kirabbanan. It doesn't make any difference if he had the relations, if he did not have the relations. According to the Tanakama, he's going to get the malchus and pay the meyasela regardless, and that follows the shita of the Rabbanan. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lilkos loka mikol makom. When it comes to malchus, he gets it in any scenario, whether there was relations or not. Meyasela, but when it comes to the 100 sela, boal nosein lo boal no nosein. If he had relations, then he pays. If he didn't have relations, he doesn't pay. Ki Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that follows the position of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And Rashi over here explains, Plugsad Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov v'Rabbanan lekamon b'shmaitin. First of all, this machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the Rabbanan is going to be later on. And what is the machlokus? The machlokus is as follows. Ki Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan say? De Amri Parshas Motzi Shem Ra bein boal, bein lo boal. They say very simply, the Parsha of Motzi Shem Ra applies regardless of whether there was relations or not. Uchsib bei v'yisru v'anshu. And it says in that Parsha, v'yisru, he gets malchus, v'anshu, he has to pay the money. In other words, according to the Rabbanan, it's very clear. It doesn't make any difference whether there was an act of relations or not. In any situation, if it turns out that he's lying, he gets the malchus and he has to pay the 100 sela. That's going to be the shita of the Rabbanan, and that the Gemara is saying that's also the shita of the Tanakama that we brought in this Tanu Rabbanan. And the other shita, Rabbi Yehuda's shita, is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What does he say? The Amar lekamon. He says later on, Lo nemar Parshas Motzi Shem Ra ela keshaboal. He says very simply, the Parsha Motzi Shem Ra is only talking about where he had relations, and he claims that she was not a besula. Now, if that's the case, so then why is it that we say it at all? Let's say by malchus, why do we say that he gets malchus if there was no act of relations? According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, the entire Parsha was written when there was an act of relations. So Rashi explains as follows: Hilkach meya sela lo mechayvin on lei ela keshabal. Therefore, the 100 sela, that's simple. And so he's only going to be chayav the 100 sela if there was relations. Avol malchus, but when it comes to malchus, why is Rabbi Yehuda making a distinction? If he follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, why is Rabbi Yehuda making a distinction by malchus and saying he always gets malchus? That's for a different reason. The Mishum Azharas lo selech Rachel hu lucky. There's another lav that applies. It says you're not allowed to be Rachel ba'amecha. You're not allowed to say lashon hara. You can't lie and say bad about somebody. V'afilu lo ba'al, and even if there was no act of relations, there's a violation here of lo selech Rachel. He's saying bad about her. The hahalach Rachel, because he's going and he's saying bad. V'im mishum dehave lav she'in bo ma'isa. Now maybe you'll say lo selech Rachel. You don't get malchus for, because that's talking. That's not a lav with a ma'isa. That's not with an action. That's a lav she'in bo ma'isa. But Rabbi Yehuda l'taimi, Rabbi Yehuda follows his opinion. The Amar lav she'in bo ma'isa loken olav. He says that a lav she'in bo ma'isa gets malchus. B'Mesechet makos u'v'shchitas chulin. That's what he says in makos and in shchitas chulin. So in other words, what the Gemara is saying is that Rabbi Yehuda is following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's shita, and really by lo ba'al there should be no punishment at all. But it happens to be that Rabbi Yehuda holds lav she'in bo ma'isa loken olav, and there's another lav over here. There's a lav of lo selech Rachel, and therefore that's why you're going to get malchus mikol makom. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that say, they have a different version of understanding this machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. They say as follows. Kula Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. You could say everybody is really following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And here's what it means. Motzi Shem Ra loka v'nosein mea sela v'hu baal. According to this version, the Tanna Kama was saying by Motzi Shem Ra, you're going to get malchus and you're paying the mea sela only if there was an act of relations, not in all situations. Not like what we said before, that the Rabbanan mean to say bein baal, bein shelo baal kirabbanan. No, they follow Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and only when there's an act of relations, and they don't say this idea of lo selech Rachel getting malchus, even in a situation of lo baal, because they don't hold that a lav shein bo ma'isa gets malchus. And Rabbi Yehuda says lilkos loka mikol makom, malchus you're going to get anyways, because again, lav shein bo ma'isa is going to get malchus according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rashi over here explains, V'hu Baal Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Again, according to this version, the Tanna Kama, the Rabbanan, are following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that it's only with an act of relations. Because Savar Tanna Kama, Libid Rabbi Eliezer, Lav Shein Bo Maisa, Ein Lokanol of the Tanna Kama, following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, says that no, when it comes to Lav Shein Bo Maisa, there's no Malchus. Or Malchus the Motzi Shem Ra Chidishu, and the fact that you get Malchus by Motzi Shem Ra is a Chidish, it's a separate pasuk. It says, V'yisru Oso Nafka, it's learned from V'yisru Oso, V'yahu Kra Kishabal Ksiv, and that pasuk is only written when there's an act of relations. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lilkos Lokam Yikol Makom, again, Rabbi Yehuda says you get Malchus anyway, to Malchus Mishum Azharas Lo Selech Rachelu, because that comes from Lo Selech Rachel, the Lav Shein Bo Maisa Lokan Olav, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, Lav Shein Bo Maisa does indeed get Malchus. But the Gemara continues, V'savar Rabbi Yehuda Lilkos Lokam Yikol Makom, but does Rabbi Yehuda really say that you get Malchus in any case, regardless of whether there was an act of relations or not? V'atanya, but we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Boal Loka, Lo Boal Eno Loka. It says the exact opposite. If he has relations, he gets Malchus. If he does not have relations, he does not get Malchus. And the Gemara answers to that, Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Loke Makas Mardus Midrabanan. When we talk about Malchus over here, we're only talking about Makas Mardus, which is a Dirabanan form of Malchus. Rashi over here says, Amar of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, Loke Mikol Mokum Deka Amar. When he says you're going to get Malchus regardless, it doesn't really mean that same kind of Malchus. Rather, it means Makas Mardus Dirabanan. It means that you're going to get Makas Mardus, which is a Dirabanan kind of Malchus that you will get, again, even in a situation where there is no act of relations. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph.